is the Evan on Planet Podcast, episode 55. I'm your host, Joel Lambenham. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to figure out how to teach better. Today on the podcast, we have Pat Ward, friend, counselor, former pastor, just a wise guy. When someone would say, especially I've been living in the South for a while now, if someone's wise, that's a good guy to have around. So Pat is definitely wise, and we are going to have a conversation that goes into a lot of different topics. It's kind of like, Pat's a good friend, so we kind of store up some things to talk about, and then it's like, hey, you know what? Might be time for a podcast episode. We had Pat on in the midst of the pandemic, talking about staying mentally fit, and we're kind of doing some of the same things and saying, like, what is this? What is like this kind of reemergence into community, into being together? What does that look like? What are some things that are happening that we maybe should pay attention to? What are those messages that are being sent? Just, again, a kind of a roaming conversation, but all around this idea of staying mentally fit and trying to take care of ourselves that way. And this is all, again, a part of the month of Joel. I thought, hey, what better way to be in the month of Joel? And again, this is just, I call it the month of Joel just because my birthday happens this month. But wanted to put out some podcasts that I wanted to put out. So here's one with Pat Ward. So you know what? Why delay any further? Here's my conversation with Pat Ward. Pat Ward, thank you so much for joining me again on the Evan on Planet Podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great this morning. Good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, well, I mean, we get to see each other a lot, but it's good to have an opportunity to share some conversations. I think our first conversation we had was on staying mentally fit, and we were in the midst of the pandemic, and hopefully we're coming out of it.
Yeah.
And so now
we are coming out of it, but it's an odd reboot, and I think a lot of people are recognizing that. I was just having a conversation this morning talking to a friend, and I was like, I think there are still some serious medical and epidemiological concerns, but I do think
good word.
Thank you. Yeah. We're just recognizing some of the long-term impacts of it. I mean, the stock market is still crazy. I started a stock market Robinhood fantasy stock market league this year. It was terrible. We all lose. Whoever wins for the week is the one that has lost lost the least percentage. Nobody's in the positive at this point. I mean, everything's crazy there. And, everybody's life just kind of got reshuffled over the last 18 months. And we're just now seeing it, the way our social circles got reshuffled, the way our religious activities got reshuffled, the way we keep up with our family in some ways, like it's really been something. And I think we're just now taking stock of that.
Yeah. I like that idea, reshuffle, because it's not like everything is bad or everything is good. Like there's some things that, have as a result of the pandemic, it really, I mean, again, putting aside the medical issues that people are going through and other than that, but there's like ways that people have sought out like authentic, connections and building on relationships, or have reevaluated, like, what are we doing with our time and how do we better use it? And so,
and it's affecting things in weird ways. Like we're a part of, the local park commission here in Oxford. My son plays on 2 different teams, and as soon as he got registered, they started sending out these emails like, we cannot find enough coaches. We can't find enough people willing to give their time to coach these teams anymore. We've never had this happen. And so I was like, well, I'll coach baseball because it happens right at the end of the summer, kind of fall baseball. And then I'll coach flag football because it's later on. And they had to delay the baseball season. So now it's like right on top of football. So we've got like, it's crazy. My son, it's like Bo Jackson. We had football practice and then baseball practice. And then we got a football game tonight, a baseball game on Wednesday night.
Oh my goodness.
So it's nuts. It's nuts for October. And then, by the time the holidays get here, it'll be, calm down again. But I was talking to the people at the park commission. They were like, we've never seen anything like it. We thought we were going to have to cancel both seasons because we just didn't have coaches. They've pulled in some students from Ole Miss to coach, which I think is great. I think that's a good strategy to begin with. I always would love to have an assistant coach from the university on the team would be great. But it's just, every organization, especially nonprofits, churches, everybody's kind of scratching their heads like, what is the new math? I know you like math. What is the new math? What's the new algorithm and how do we crack it here?
Yeah. I mean, cause even too, in our neck of the woods here. I mean, you can, sometimes you can have more coaches for baseball than players on the field at some time.
That's right.
So that is kind of shocking.
That's right. So that's from an organizational standpoint. From the other standpoint, the people that I work with, I see some people experiencing some anxiety about, hey, life is kind of restarting. How do I re-engage there in some new ways? Maybe some of the people who listen to your podcast are the same way. It's not the anxiety that people felt in 2020, 2021 about going back to work so much and like, am I safe? Is this, am I safe from a virus? Am I safe from governmental overreach? Am I, whatever, all these other things that were so scary, but it's more like, who am I as a person and what part of me do I take my social circles? What part of me am I taking back to my family? How have I changed through this kind of historic thing that we've been through? And so I see people really, really struggling in a lot of ways to answer those questions. But then also there's a lot of guilt, like, hey, this was always important to me and it's just not anymore. I'm not engaged like I was. So how are we helping people kind of re-engage in some of the secondary parts of their life that actually make up life and who they are? So some of those conversations have been really helpful to have.
Yeah. Well, and just to back up just a little bit, just in case people hadn't heard of the first episode or they're unfamiliar with the legend of Pat Ward. Put you out there. Can you just give a brief self-introduction, kind of like a little bit of your background and what you're currently doing?
Sure. So I'm a counselor here in Oxford, Mississippi, but I see people all over the state through telehealth, which has been a wonderful new frontier during the pandemic. I see people in Oxford via telehealth because I don't want to get out and come see me in my office. They got stuff to do, but they really want to have the kind of conversations and do the kind of work that we work on. And so we meet that way, but I also see people in person here. And, one of the things that I love about my practice is it runs the gambit. I mean, any given day of seeing people, I'll have conversations with people who are, teenagers, people who are college students, people who are been married for a long time, people who are addicts, people who, all across the board, every hour is something a little bit different. And so I'm really thankful for that. I really love it. I feel like over the last 2 years, not only have I seen a lot of life, but I feel like I've been able to see the pandemic in some new ways. It's kind of 360 degrees as I've seen some people walk through it. And so that's kind of my point of reference in a lot of ways of kind of understanding how people are reemerging and reengaging there. I also, for 13 years before that, was the pastor of a church. So not only from a side of helping people keep track of their spiritual lives, but also from a place of organizational leadership. I can see I'm a little bit sensitive to seeing some of the struggle that organizations are having right now on the other side of that too. And, through all of that, I work with a lot of educators now, people who are in education and being in a university town, even the years that I was leading the Orchard, which is the church that I was a pastor of, I was kind of tapped into a lot of people who are in education. Yeah. So, so that's why I like the kind of conversations you're having on this podcast, and glad to be a part of it today.
Well, and just from a personal perspective, I was a member, or I still am a member of the Orchard, and knowing that my own personal path to staying mentally fit ran right by Pat Ward, where he's like, you should probably go talk to somebody about some of this stuff and direct me. And so knowing how much that I've benefited personally, just, hanging on to some things for way too long, and, just the relief and now the different perspectives I can bring online. And then also just thinking about this now, the story I can share with some of the people I deal with, teachers especially, and saying, hey, this is, just like you go for runs, and to take care of your body, you need to do some things to take care of your mind, take care of yourself. So some of the other aspects.
That's a good word.
Yeah. So what are we going to talk about here?
Let me tell you just a couple of things as we're talking about. These are a few of the things that I'm trying to help people connect with. Sweet. We're kind of re-engaging with these secondary but still very important things. One is, I think is really important in this season to come to terms with our values. Like, what are the things that we really hold dear? And even if those things are misaligned sometimes with the way that we have budgeted our time and our energy in the past, they can still be really important. We may just budget our time and energy a little bit differently. And that's okay. It's okay for the deck to be reshuffled every while. It is there. I don't want to be too dramatic, but it is almost like the world kind of is emerging into almost a midlife crisis of asking some questions about some of these things. And that's okay. There are some good things that can come out of midlife crisis. They sold a lot of convertibles because people have those. And so it's okay. It's okay to ask some of those deep questions. Just make sure that at the end, you're kind of thinking about, okay, what are my values? What do I want the cumulative impact of my life to be? And then how does that inform the way that I give my time and energy? I also think, we're seeing some younger and younger people wrestle with these things in the same way. And so for people who are out there who are listening, who are educators, I mean, helping young people sort through that can be really helpful as well, especially teenagers. I mean, I talked to one young man recently who was like, I've played football every year for the last 4 or 5 years, Pee Wee football. I mean, that was my thing. And it's just not in me right now. And it's a hard thing to be a part of. It's, physically and mentally, if you just don't feel it anymore. And so everybody's kind of scratching their heads like, what's wrong? Why is he feeling this way? But, for some people, they're just rethinking some of the things they give their time and their energy to. And so using that as a conversation, especially with young people about values and about what do you want the story to be is really important. And we're at a really important time for that. I also think, in general, it's good to think about a time and energy budget. Not only is it good for individuals to think about that, but for people who are married to think about that. A lot of couples think the only budget that they have to keep in working order is their financial budget. As long as more money comes in than goes out of the month, they're good at managing their life. But that's just one of a couple of different budgets that they need to manage. We also need to manage the way that we schedule our time, which is a huge thing that impacts a lot of families, the way we budget our time. And then also the way we budget our passion and our interests. We manage all three of those budgets to create the kind of life that we want to live. And so I think that's a really helpful way to think about it. And this season may be encouraging people to think about it in that way. And then the last thing is like, it's okay. No, what were you going to say?
No, keep going. You keep going.
Oh, the last thing is it's okay to reshuffle sometimes. It's okay. It's okay to ask some questions. It's okay to try some new things. We should be encouraging people to do that. That is all right.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to go like the example you gave of the young man who's like, wasn't feeling football. I'm sure there's other people that they're not feeling certain things, but then how do you, even taking an activity as all encompassing as football, which, you would do some things for it in the spring. You do it was almost like a year round activity and took up a lot of time and everything. So now, so maybe it was a healthy decision on not do, but so like thinking about people that are having time that is open up, like using, like, how do you choose to use your time? How do you, like, now you're talking about budgeting, but like all of a sudden he's got this surplus. It's like handing a kid a bunch of cat, like, okay, what do you do with this time in healthy ways? Right.
It doesn't need to go all through your Xbox. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and from a personal perspective, that's what we had, all activities like you're talking about the youth sports, like every night, you might have multiple games a night, and then all of a sudden, boom, that stopped. And I think we did a good job of using our time as a family during the pandemic when it was shut down, lockdown. But then re-entering has been tough to even to think like, well, and because you're trying to help your child who maybe went to sports as a default. Like, there were certain things like, hey, we're always going to sign up. We're always going to sign up. And all of a sudden it's like, we're being thought like, am I pushing to get into a sport, or is that unhealthy to try to do that? Or is it like, hey, we need to do something here. And it's like, as a parent, it's been tough thinking about that.
Yeah. And we realize that gravity kind of pulls us back into some of those old patterns. That's why they were patterns to begin with, whether it's default activities. I love that term, but also just default busyness and things. Like, I know that one of the things both of our families did, I think, and we're kind of these are kind of dad projects, but one of the things we both did was we really invested a lot in our backyards.
That's right.
So you guys built
Yours
like
is
a
looking
movie
good.
back there.
Yours is looking real good.
It looks real good, which is great. We put a little patio out there, and I got a TV hung up out there, and like we spent a lot of time out there during the pandemic, and it was glorious. It was like it was just the space was so nice for our family, but it really is. It takes intention, and it takes planning, and it takes popcorn, and it takes like, hey, tonight we are going to spend some time on the back porch. It was so much easier to spend that intentional time doing things like that when we didn't have anything else to go on. But those are the things I don't want to unlearn. You know, I want to make sure that, I keep finding the value in that, and encouraging my kids to do that too. That's one of the things. I know this is a podcast a lot about education, but like sometimes keeping our eye on unlearning the things, not unlearning the things that we need to hold on to is just as important as learning new things.
Right.
And I think that's a really important.
Right. Reinforcing the things that are important, right? That's what we need to be doing.
Yep.
And you do that with planning and intention and the things that you say, and like evaluating being intentional about those. How am I going to budget my time? I mean, and also too, because we've seen we both had also put in home offices over the pandemic too, where we work. And so like, it was really easy to sneak in there for a Zoom or another meeting, or I just got to clean up a little work, because there wasn't that intentionality of separation between I'm going to be at an office or I'm going to be at home.
Yeah.
Like, those same things too.
And it worked for a while. We were kind of running on, glad to just still be in productive mode, but that some of those patterns are unsustainable too.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you sent me a link that I'm glad you did, about something to talk about. Do you want to introduce it?
I just was trying to figure out what we could talk about that would be relevant to education right now, but also mental health and mental fitness. And
right.
There've been a lot of news stories lately about this TikTok trend, devious licks. I don't know. Have you heard about it before?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I had a conversation. Actually, my daughter and Joel's daughter are friends, and so she was at our house some this weekend. We were all talking about some of the ways that this has shown up locally. But basically, it's TikTok trend hashtag. I'm trying not to sound like an ancient person. I'm not a boomer. I am a millennial, but I'm trying not to sound that way. But it's a TikTok trend where young people are just destroying stuff and then posting it on TikTok for other people to enjoy.
It sounded like Project Mayhem from Fight Club, basically.
Yeah.
Where they get like these tasks to do.
Yeah, which is great as a movie, but not really
in real
good
life. Yeah.
Like at a school. And apparently when I was looking for an article to send you just so we'd have an anchoring point, it has now progressed from like putting spoiled milk into the hand, like the soap dispensers, or breaking urinals. It's like apparently slap a teacher is now a part of it.
Yeah.
Have you heard about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's like, and you'll see some posts on Facebook and about that. I mean, and it just like, teachers are stressed enough, and the fact that this is something that's out there, I mean, that just adds more stress, right? Like,
yeah.
But thinking about that and the struggle of, so what, I don't know. So Pat, you're trained. Why is this a thing? I just don't get it.
I don't know why it's a thing, but I think I do have a little bit of insight into how it's come about. I do think overall it is tied into something that has always happened, which is young people trying to break away from authority and trying to find themselves by figuring out where parents, school administrators, like where that stops and where they start. That's kind of the challenge of adolescence, especially, is you're trying to figure out like, okay, who am I in reaction to this? You throw into the mix now that we have social media, so people are trying to figure out like, who am I in relation to my audience, which is an absurd thing. We never would have thought it would be a good idea to give every 16-year-old, 14-year-old an audience, but they have one now. And so you're trying to be a nonconformist, but also a conformist at the same time, which kind of can twist things around. And so there are some old dynamics. This is in some ways the same song, but another verse.
Right.
But in in a lot of different ways, the verses now grow more intense just because of the way that social media and social media dynamics increase the intensity of things, the way that, groupthink has always gotten people in trouble. But now, we can all kind of get, or especially young people, but even old people too, let's be honest, all can get kind of caught up in the intoxicating effect of, being liked and literally being liked on Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or whatever. I mean, it is intoxicating. And so sometimes it's easy to miss what's going on there. And
yeah. I don't know if you watched there's the HBO documentary Break Stuff about Woodstock 99, which was the, Limp Bizkit and Tool. And where it was just a disaster. But watching it, I've heard somebody accurately describe it. It's like a horror movie watching what's happening during that concert. And it's almost the same thing where there is this, I want to break away during a place that's Woodstock supposed to be peace and love, and definitely not, right. But I want to break away from social norms and my music is expression. But at the same time, then you're conforming to this whole group doing these things and basically tearing apart a concert venue and all sorts of crimes that were being committed there. It was just, but it was almost like a social experiment. It was just crazy. But then you think if you add social media to that, and now we're doing things like devious licks. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I was thinking too about what if, I was a teacher in this thing. It just, it's that relationship building, right? There's rules and all these rules that you could put into place. And I know they're limiting, in the article, they talk about limiting access to bathrooms and things like that. And now, which is just sad that needs to happen. But how do you create a culture within your school that, is about caring for each other, looking out for each other? And yeah, you're going to have some folks that are still trying to find ways to express themselves in unproductive or unhealthy ways, but building relationships with students and because I had, students that were, tried to push the boundaries a lot, but then because we had a relationship, you could just look at them, cock your head a little bit. And all of a sudden, they see, Dr. Amber doesn't want me doing that, or Mr. Amber doesn't want me doing that. Right. And I know that. And so just those healthy relationships with students and again, if they're looking for a way to belong to a group, how can we find them places to belong, people to belong with, and positive groups to be a part of. And even if it's not the, how all these different activities and things that people can be a part of, but finding places for everyone to join in with that are in healthy and productive ways. I think that's important.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. I mean, we've either got to get better at building those relationships, or we got to just start slapping random kids and hoping that works in reverse, administrative licks or whatever. And I don't think that'll work, but it's interesting because now this generation exists at a really interesting time as people's understanding of kind of authority and the establishment has really changed over the last decade. Think about it. The biggest taxi company in this country is not a single company. It is you getting in a car with a stranger that you hailed on Uber. I mean, it is a decentralized model. I mean, I haven't traveled in a long time that I didn't stay in an Airbnb with my family. I'm staying in somebody else's house because they had a favorable review on Airbnb instead of staying at a big hotel chain. I know there's people still do that a lot, but I mean, that is one of the fastest growing parts of the hospitality sector. We have decentralized it all. It's not like a down with the man thing. I think it started as an economic, kind of a new frontier, and it was cheaper and, more of an adventure. But at the same time, it has in some ways solidified our struggle with, the establishment, especially for people who trend a little bit younger than you and I. But I think into that mix, we now have a generation of students, kids who, have taken that even to a new level. I think one of the things that I think is most interesting about Generation Z is they have information at their fingertips about everything, anything that they need to know. They have at their fingertips. We laugh about, our kids, if we're in casual conversation. This happened the other day when Annie was at our house, we just asked Alexa, and all of a sudden the conversation was over. And they have all the understanding, all the knowledge. They don't have understanding. They have all of the information that they need. What really is the thing that they're seeking out from other people, especially people who are older or have any kind of authority in their life, is they're seeking out that connection, that relationship. And that, if we have something real and meaningful, is to offer that to them. Now, it's a hard sell, because as much as teachers who are intuitive and teachers who are emotive or empathetic, like I think people like you are, I know, and people who follow you and listen to your podcast, it is deeply meaningful for them to see a kid, cheer for that kid, not excuse, but at least understand some of the variations in their behavior and try to see through that. You put that on one end of the scale, and then you put the cumulative weight of a TikTok audience, people who are finding these things through, that algorithm that keeps them locked in all the time. And it's hard to find. It's hard to say that they even out on those scales, that they weigh the same amount to a young person, but we got to figure out how to do that. I mean, they really need people who are offering them genuine connection, not just people who are being entertained by them.
Yeah. And so and again, talking about the reshuffling, like where people might not be in the spaces, maybe even some of those healthy spaces. There are, some of these kids might have had healthy spaces to be a part of, in relationships, and great productive relationships as well. And also too, there's kids have done a lot of growing in isolation, in a social distance. Someone said, when was the last regular in quotation marks school year for some of these kids that just entered high school, which is I don't know about you, but I had a lot of emotional growing happen before I came into high school. And you think about, when was the last regular year they had? Would they have been in sixth grade or something like that? Their full, year. And you think about that, where, okay, so who are they interacting with? And a lot of it probably was on social media or through some things like that. And so again, encouraging folks to get reconnected, or finding those connections in those positive spaces, and just thinking about all the different
absolutely all
the different groups that there could be a part of that. There are many, if it's Cub Scouts, if it's there's youth groups at local churches, and I mean all sorts of different groups that are out there that people could be a part of, to feel that that connection. And then it's maybe about it's about putting your effort and time into that, rather than trying to do some of these things.
Yep. And a lot of our time was spent at the lowest common denominator when everything was going crazy, and so for people who were kind of reemerging, understanding that just the gravitational pull is towards busyness, but also for any I would say older person who is realized their social life and their calendar has kind of been reshuffled over the last couple of years, I think it's worth acknowledging that, hey, Facebook would love all that extra attention, and they'll take it. They'll keep you scrolling, and you can be plugged into who to be mad at today and what the next argument is going to be. The 24-hour news cycle would love to just kind of keep you there as a viewer who is, upset, ranting and raving to yourself in the chair. That's where the gravitational pull is there. But then also, some of the things were really easy ways for our kids to connect and spend their time during the pandemic, and they're still easy. They're designed that way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the best. That hours and hours on Minecraft is the best thing for them to be doing with their time. And so we've got to figure out how to encourage that as parents, but then also as people who interact with families too, is to help them see, hey, your budget is not your time budget is not just something to hoard over, but sometimes you do have to be willing to put an investment in. And sometimes it's risky. It's risky to put your kid on a team. That there's hours of commitment that go along with that, but it may be a good thing for them. It's risky to take your kids to youth group, even if your youth group is not, a very large youth group, or even if your youth group, they don't have a whole lot of friends already at whatever youth group it is. It may be, it's good for them to go and try to figure out how to elbow their way in there.
Yeah. I mean, at a minimum, I know that I'm getting, when I drop off my kids at youth group, I know there's a pretty cool adult that's willing to invest some time and to my kid. And that's pretty neat.
And
that's
even if it's right, even if right now it's just about pizza and about, some kind of game that they've come up with, when our children go through hard times, they have another trusted adult that they can talk to besides us. And that's the thing that I'm always looking for in trying to figure out how to budget my kids' social circle, is like when they have the thing that comes up and they're like, I can't talk to my parents about this.
Right.
Who is in their path that they can say, well, maybe I can trust this healthy person instead. And who are they going to talk to? And so I really want to make sure that they have those people in their lives. In general, I would say that's another thing that Generation Z, this next generation, really needs, is like, we need to be helping them focus on healthy relationships too. And I know that, as educators have influence over their lives for a good chunk of time over the course of a year. I mean, trying to figure out how to help them be well connected. It's not something that they can just Google, but it's something that they can learn in the fire of, school, in the fire of, activities and things like that. And if we can point out the ways that they're doing that well, and maybe some of the ways that they're doing that poorly, but they don't see some of the impacts of that, then I think that can be helpful too.
Yeah. We just, previous episode, we talked about the culture code. And the one thing that I took away from that was on, that's about creating successful groups and like having frequent, healthy, productive, maybe it's just frequent, productive collisions, which is, basically like saying,
I like that.
Putting people in place that, like if I want my kid to be involved in something, I want my kid to be a part of something, like the fact that they have a chance to interact with great people, like that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And then now that comes back to, again, like you said before, how to budget my time. What are we going to invest in? What, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And maybe that was part of what happened during the pandemic, was that we just didn't have our collision rate went way down, and that wasn't necessarily a good thing. Now we all kind of need to get out there and collide some more, but we definitely need to get our kids out there colliding some more.
That's right.
In healthy ways, not in break the
right. Yeah. Have a new driver, no collisions there, please. Yeah.
I think the other thing too is that I do think that this generation does have a value for facts. I think it's funny how when I talk to people as a counselor, I do some level of psychoeducation about like, hey, this is what depression looks like, and this is what it means, or this is what anxiety feels like, and this is what it means, or this is what it, this is what you do if you're suicidal. When I talk to young people, they know all that because they've Googled that. They've read it all. They understand it. They are like regurgitating to me the things that I feel like are important to teach people about when we're talking about mental health. They've lived in a world that has valued mental health. And so if we want to come and talk to kids or adolescents about some of the things that we see, we can approach them with some of the facts. I think some of the stuff that's come out recently about what Facebook knew about Instagram and suicide rates in teenage girls, I think it's abhorrent. But I also think that there are some teenage girls that I've worked with and some that are in classrooms out there that would respond to that of like, oh, the data says this. Well, I knew that it didn't always put me in a good space. And so maybe I should be questioning that too. I think we can come to them with information and then help them try to sort out what that could mean. Now, one thing we can't fix is that teenagers from the dawn of time had always had swampy head syndrome. So swampy head syndrome is where you move from one moment you're on firm ground and you can think linearly. It's like, hey, if I break this urinal, I'm going to get in trouble for it or whatever. And then sometimes you're off of solid ground into the swamp and you're up to your eyeballs and you're just kind of raw hormones and emotions and just going along with whatever you think, is right at the moment. And so we can't always take data and facts to them and expect them to rub their chin and say, I'm going to figure this out. But we can at some level do that.
Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about helping students maybe grow and struggle here?
The one last thing that I think it is indicative of this generation is I think we have taught them, or we are doing a better job of teaching them how to have boundaries and how to acknowledge their limits when they're stressed out, when they're anxious, when they're in need. One thing that we still struggle to do is to teach perseverance and tenacity. We got to figure out how, when we see that in a good, helpful direction in a young person, we got to figure out how to applaud that in and of itself. Hey, you showed some real resilience here. You showed some persistence here. I like the grit that you brought to this. I think that is the thing that if we don't figure out how to instill that in young people, I think that is something that continues to take from them long-term in their life. And so we got to figure out how to do that. And I think now that we're back into collision season and things being reshuffled and restarted and kind of re-engagement, I think we're going to have a lot of opportunities to speak that into the young people's lives.
Yeah. Well, in one of the areas that I talk about in this podcast a little bit is about struggle. And some colleagues and I, we talk about celebrating the struggle and knowing that, I mean, because when someone hears like, talk about helping our students grow and struggle, someone might have said like, wait, we don't want our students to struggle. Yes, you do. And everyone knows about an opportunity, something that they've done in their lives that are like, wow, that was really hard. I went through it, but that's probably the thing you celebrate the most. I ran that half marathon. I got this degree. I did all, whatever these things were. I reared some children, got them through the swamp years, and thinking about the struggle is something, to celebrate. And so, not to, if you hear your student is struggling or, not to come in and take it all away. Cause that could be the opposite of loving on them. It could be like
absolutely
productive struggle. Yeah. If there's struggle where they're frozen, maybe they need some guidance, but to still, let them still work through it and celebrate that and say, I saw you worked really hard on that. And that was, wow. Like, maybe you didn't get the greatest grade, but it's like, I saw how the effort and the tenacity and the perseverance, the grit, all that stuff that you put into play. And those are things, cause as a parent or as a teacher, even a parent and a teacher, like if you're not gonna be around forever. So like they need those skills in order to make sense of problems, persevere in solving them. That's the number one standard for mathematical practice from the College Career Readiness Standards. There you go.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Hey, you want to talk about something fun?
Yeah.
So what does Ted Lasso have to teach us about mental health? I did a solo thing on Ted Lasso. And I was like, I need somebody to talk about Ted Lasso with. And I know you could.
Yeah. So I actually have a Ted Lasso shirt my wife got me, and I wear it whenever I coach Little League, just to make sure that people know I have no idea what I'm doing. I want that to be the expectation to go into it. But it's a fantastic joke. It just kind of sticks out in a big way because it's been so long since we've had a character like Ted Lasso on TV. I'm trying to trace those kind of warm, lovely character traits. It kind of reminds me of Mork. Did you ever watch Mork and Mindy reruns when you were a kid?
No, did not. Sorry. Well, I mean, I've seen some clips of it. Yeah. So
Robin Williams,
classic.
Just like everything was good, everything was lovable. I'm trying to think who else. So we just don't have
Balky from Perfect Strangers.
Yes, Balky. Yes, totally. I think that's about it, but as a main character, it's so refreshing to see somebody who is just like genuinely good and genuinely positive. Mm-hmm. Now it's an interesting show too, because it was like they said, hey, we want to throw a whole lot of dirty language and some dad jokes together and make like a good show for everybody. But I do think, especially the first season, I mean, there was just this refreshing look that I think where we all were at the time that Ted Lasso came out, it was just like, yes, please. Kind of the opposite of modern politics, kind of the opposite of we're just looking for abrasion and a fight. I mean, it was really a good thing.
Yeah.
I think in season 2, and I'm like 3 or 4 episodes behind at this point. But in season 2, I think they get more into the fact that A, there's more of a dynamic there behind the scenes than we thought. And B is just because somebody is like happy and put together on the outside, sometimes they may really be hurting on the inside. And so I think that we're seeing that in a couple more dimensions in season 2.
Yeah, and just deal with some of the the complexities of like, in the fact that he is human, right? And like, he's not like, I think some of those characters that we mentioned, they're kind of like a little bit one dimensional, but I mean, like, that there's some depth there. Like, there's reasons why he's doing things the way he does, and just especially with, bringing in the character of Sharon, the counselor in the second season, and like, how people are dealing with her and how he deals with her. It's like, it's pretty amazing. And again, like you're saying, like dealing with some of the issues, and no spoilers here, but yeah, but even too, just thinking about like some of the, you see some of the things in some other of the characters, like, Nate, the guy who was started off as the kit man or whatever, the manager, the equipment manager, and then rise up to become a coach. And you see like, well, it's not all just happy, because he's also, it has some imposter syndrome, or he has some like, I want to be out there, and just even like some of those issues. I don't know. It in a way, it just shines a light on all these different things that we're all dealing with. And I think, gives you a little bit of perspective on it,
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. The only thing, and again, I'm very early in season 2, but they do introduce this Dr. Fieldstone, who is the therapist that's come to help the team through some things. And there is kind of this mysticism. She kind of sits off to the side and doesn't really engage. And there is just kind of like this aura around her. And one of the things that I'm always intrigued about is how therapists and counselors are portrayed in popular culture. And, it has been a career that's kind of been, or a profession that has been used in some healthy ways and some unhealthy ways. I mean, I love Frasier. I've always loved Frasier. I thought that was really funny, especially the difference between Frasier Crane and Niles Crane. But then also, and What About Bob? Richard Dreyfuss' character in that, he's so anal. I mean, it turns out you realize he's the sick person.
Yeah.
Bob, I guess Bob is the Ted Lasso.
Yeah, but there you go. Yeah. Bob,
Bill Murray is the Ted Lasso of that movie.
Perfect. Yeah.
But he finally breaks. The doctor down in What About Bob, and then you see it in Good Will Hunting. And sometimes it's good and it's helpful portrayal. Sometimes it's not so good and not so helpful. I do struggle sometimes with people who, in an effort to try to normalize people thinking about mental health, have kind of deified that profession or kind of mystified that profession. And I tell people all the time, like, I'm not a wizard. The work that we do together is work that you're going to do. I will do my best to help you see the work that's ahead of you, and let you know that if at the end of the day, you definitely don't have to go at it alone. Even if everybody else is gone, like, there's somebody here like cheering from you from the stands. But it's not wizardry. It's you finding your healthy space, finding a space to tell what's going on with you, and know that the building won't fall down if you speak the truth about where you are. But there's no wizardry here.
Yeah. I like that. So what you kind of mentioned it before, but just want to make sure, that I think maybe with the reshuffling of the pandemic, that going to a counselor has become as easy as logging on to a Zoom. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, I mean, like, some of the people, like, they had these barriers to entry for going to a counselor, like, oh, I only take people in my office, or blah, blah, blah. And like, hey, some of those barriers got, brought down. So maybe you didn't know it's a little bit more approachable to go seek out the help that you might need. So,
yeah. Or even in relationships too. I mean, every marriage is a little bit different. It's helped to do counseling sometimes online, because you have couples that live in different cities because of work or things like that. I mean, it's or because things have just gotten so kind of intense, kind of broken, that it's better for them to be in a different place instead of trying to sit there and speak the truth with each other, knowing that emotions run high there. I mean, it's just, it has given there have been some things that I've seen that have been really good about, like, opening the door a little bit wider for people to get the help that they need, that we all need at some point.
Yeah, that's for sure. So, Pat, any final words on staying mentally fit? I mean, we had lots of good golden nuggets in here.
Just a couple of bullet points from what we talked about, because I know it was a lot just to take away. Like, if you're feeling the reshuffle, make it count. Like, we may never have this chance again, so make it count. Let's look back on this reentry season and see some real fruit from that, and let's help the other people that we have responsibility for, whether it's teachers and students, the people in our family, our kids, other friends that we have. Let's help them all reshuffle well as well. Keep in mind, that the next generation is valuing connection over instruction. You have a lot. I mean, as a job description, you guys have a lot to instruct on, but they really are looking like, does somebody see me? Does somebody genuinely care about me? And I know that you do. You wouldn't be listening to a podcast about being a good educator if you didn't like truly deeply care about the responsibility that you've been given. So, continue to keep that in mind. And some of the behavior we see is just a cry for connection. And so it's important to keep that in mind. And then, when you need help, you don't need wizardry. You just need somebody who can walk with you for a little while. And so if that's in a counselor, then reach out. But if that's just in a trusted friend who can just be a good listener and tell you you're not crazy, or you are crazy, and that's okay, then, seek that out. Life is hard. And even as life kind of moves a little bit more and more back to normal, still hard in some new ways. And so be kind to yourself and reach out to people if that's what you need. So.
I just want to reinforce what you said, Pat. I had 2 teachers on another podcast mention that their path to becoming a teacher, they thanked 2 teachers, and both of them talked about being seen by that teacher. And it wasn't about a lesson. It wasn't about anything subject. It was like, I was seen by that teacher. And so like talking about connection, and just put a little extra sauce on those bullet points.
So valuable.
Anything to promote, Pat? You got anything besides, we can put your contact information in there for,
sure.
But anything else?
I would just say the book that I am constantly talking about for people is called The Relationship Cure by John Gottman. It is kind of the opposite of boundaries. So, when we talk about boundaries, but you're supposed to take a drink, right? Take a shot, boundaries. But the Relationship Cure, even though I don't love the name, it's a great like Boundaries 2.0, because it's not about like putting up boundaries. It's about how to make the best connections. And what I love about it is I encourage a lot of couples to read it, because I think there's some stuff in there that's really good for them, but it's actually not a marriage book. It's a book for everybody in relationships. So it helps with workplace. It would help with some of the things that people are going with through in schools and in educational settings and stuff like that. And just practical things that you can pass along to families that you're connected with, or your own family. And so they've done some really smart research about breaking down relationships to the atomic level. And it's just great. I have a lot of good conversations from people who engage with that book. So that would be my recommendation, The Relationship Cure by John Gottman.
Nice. I wrote it down. We'll put a link to it in the show notes.
There we go. Well, if you get him on the show, let me join, please.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and I was just going to say, like, I think this is a good regular occurrence. I know you've got some things that you store up and we can share. And I know several people have talked about your first episode, and I'd love to keep that going. And
let's do it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Pat. Thanks for joining us.
Yep. It was my pleasure. Have a great day.
There it is. Another great conversation with Pat Ward. We talked about all sorts of different things, man. We talked about Ted Lasso, Devious Licks, all sorts of stuff. Actually, I wonder, now that I've seen the end of Ted Lasso, and once he catches up, I'd love to talk to Pat again. Well, anyway, we can do that because we're close and we talk to each other often, so we can just hit record one of those times. Anyway, Pat also, this is exciting, has started a podcast called The Homeward Collective. It's with him and a colleague, Taryn Mao, and they have a great trailer. I'll post the trailer in the show notes so you can hear what the Homeward Collective is about. But from the trailer and from some of the initial things, it was like, not about more book. Basically, their clients were talking about, hey, rather than recommending more books, how about you recommend more podcasts? Which is great. I mean, again, I like podcasts, obviously, but thinking about like having the digestible format of a podcast to be able to share, hey, here's some things that I want you to think about, And you can get it while you're on a run, while you're driving, in other places where might not have the time to sit down and read a book. I love reading books, but again, podcasts might be a little bit more accessible. So great to see that. I'm excited to see what they're going to come up with their content. Again, I'll post the links to it in the show notes. So if you're excited about that, you can go to AmazonPlanet.com/episode 55, where you can find links to this and other stuff that we talked about in this episode. If you're looking for ways to support this podcast or the Homeward Collective podcast, support podcasts. I love it. Anyway, if you want to support a podcast, subscribe to them. So then when they're ready, so when the next episode of the Homeward Collective comes out, you'll get it in your podcast inbox or whatever platform you're using. It'd be like for me in Spotify, I see a little red dot, like, ooh, there's a new episode of 60 Songs That Explain the 90s, which is awesome. It's on Spotify. Check it out if you haven't seen it. So subscribe to the podcast, rate or review podcasts. Again, that'll allow folks that are looking for podcasts, like some of the people that Pat and Taryn are talking about. Like, they're looking for podcasts. If they're looking for some things that are similar, the ratings and reviews allow people to find those. So go ahead and do that. I also have an email list. I haven't done a lot with it lately, but we're kind of in the midst of a crazy semester, but we're thinking about what does that look like to relaunch it. But if you're interested in whenever something comes out on Amazon Planet, you can subscribe to the Amazon Planet download. Just go to AmazonPlanet.com. There's lots of buttons where you can hit join the email list. You do that, and we'll have lots of good stuff happening there. Follow at Amazon Planet on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or like the Amazon Planet Facebook page. You can do those things. Keep connected with us on social media. You can also check out the Amazon Planet store or Amazon Planet bookshop. That's a way to financially support the podcast. It doesn't take a lot to run the podcast, but it does take something. So it's nice to have the support through your purchases through the Amazon Planet store or Amazon Planet bookshop. The links can be found in the footer at AmazonPlanet.com. Again, all those purchases support the production costs of the podcast. Finally, thank you for listening to this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Thanks to Pat Ward for sharing his expertise and his wisdom. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. Love it. And finally, thank you to all of you out there who are seeking to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you've been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.